All right, where was I? Typically you will get light frigates that will long point you, and battleships, and if you get any logistics augers, they'll hover around the 100 kilometer meter. Oh my god, the 100 kilometer range to snipe and support the APOCs. Now, if you get a Balgorn with this defense fleet, the one that spawns with the FOB, they will stick with the sniping battleships and snipe you. So you are free of whatever nuding they do. So the frigates are easy to kill because there's no logi repairing them. Now, if there's more frigates than your DPS spider tanking, the frigates will target your support ships. So say if I'll show you here. I will cancel my attacks. Bring in my ogres. So what would happen typically is you won't get enough frigates you'll get enough frigates, say, to warp disrupt all your RRBSing ships. And the reason I like the RRBSing is because this FOB does not spawn anything or scram. There's no jammers on this grid for Blood Raiders. So using RRBS is optimal, especially because you can shift your logistics and get more repairing than you could do locally, right? And there's a lot of DPS, especially with cruisers. Now, say I'm going to warp off my destroyer here. And sometimes I've found that when I warp off something, it will spawn a frigate. Typically what spawns in a reinforcement depends on, the whole class of the ship. And I've found that going down to my drone bunny will be a frigate. My ECM boat will be a frigate. My anti-frigate ship will be a destroyer, and it sometimes will spawn a cruiser, sometimes a frigate. But yeah, the frigates will mostly spawn Cruors, which is great. You can deal with those easily enough. The last thing you want to do is spawn more augers. Augers with cruisers are a different matter. With cruiser spawn, you'll get cruisers, omens, and you'll get augers. You'll get arbitrators that'll weapon disrupt you and be sniping out at 200 kilometers plus. It's really annoying, especially when you're trying to kill things at long range. And you'll also get Cruors. And you will, if you're lucky, you'll get a few. If you're unlucky, you'll get a few Ashimus, which will ruin your day because they do a lot of nuding damage. Now, the defense fleet, when they first warp in, will starburst. They'll warp off to 400-ish kilometers and then warp back on top of you. It's really annoying. So that's the defense fleet. And if you say you're soloing and you get cruisers, warp the hell off, wait till they despawn. They despawn pretty quick if they haven't aggressed on you. If they have, it takes 15 minutes, so it's like snore. But if you can do that and re-roll and get battleships, good for you. You've lowered your DPS incoming, and that's perfect. And it doesn't take too long if you do it smart. Now, if the hauler shows up, and I'm expecting it will because it hasn't yet, but this could be a new FOB, and I'll talk about that now. So a new FOB, less than 6 hours old, will not have a mining fleet at belt. And I don't see a mining fleet. So, okay, so it's less than 6 hours old. Every 12 hours, the detection range of the pirate strongholds. See, I'm using my scroll wheel. Detection range goes up by 1 jump. When we first were encountering FOBs, when they first got introduced, it was weird because some of them could be detected 5 jumps out, some you could only detect it in the system, and we wondered if it was light years, right? If light years was the factor in detect, and it wasn't, and we were like, what? But we eventually discovered that, I discovered that it was, well, I don't know if anybody else had at the time, but I was reporting that it was every 12 hours, the jump range would be increased by 1. And you do the math for 5 jumps away, and it never grows beyond 5 jumps. And some systems are more prone to being spawning points for FOBs, and it shifts sometimes. After a while, it'll shift to another system, but some systems are really popular for FOB spawning. It can be quite annoying for the upwell owners there, getting notifications. Now, the response fleet, when the hauler does spawn, because there's miners in system, when you're anywhere near miners or a hauler, bestower or impel, I haven't figured out exactly why you get an impel sometimes. I could guess, but this is more the facts I do know. So a response fleet, different than a defense fleet. A response fleet typically are frigates. Sometimes they're cruisers, sometimes they're battleships. And they will spawn, and if you warp off, they will warp off as well. They will actually warp to their haulers and miners' safe spot, which is a random safe spot. I haven't figured out what exactly the logic is on where that safe spot occurs, but if you warp to that safe spot where the frigates and the haulers are, the haulers will warp off again to another safe spot. So it's best to keep the response fleet distracted, and that will pin the haulers in place, and they're like sitting ducks at their safe spot. Combat probe them down. Alright. Now then, the difference between defense and response fleet is the response fleet will not starburst. So they slow boat towards you. And the nice thing about that is you can distract them at an asteroid belt using a small frigate with micro warp drive, orbiting an asteroid at 500 kilometers. Do be quick about it because, they're fast and they'll kill you. So as soon as you warp to the belt where you see the miners start orbiting, getting away and preparing to orbit that asteroid at 500 kilometers as quick as you can. And at that point, you've distracted them. The haulers are pinned at their safe spot. And most importantly, you won't get a hauler at the FOB to complicate matters. So that's what we do know about those two things. Now, there's another interesting thing I'll backtrack and talk about the defense fleet. When you get omens, they actually have an anchor. Like those things, they're keeping together because they've got an anchor. The lead will usually be the anchor, and they just anchor on it. So you can, when they're omens, you can web that anchor and all the rest of them will naturally slow down to orbit around their anchor. It's a hilarious mechanic. I didn't discover it. Aronius II did. He's part of Exidium Alliance. And that was like, in hindsight, it should have been obvious, but, can't think of everything, right? And so credit goes to him for pointing it out, because I don't think I would have figured it out by myself. Anyway, so that's the defense and response fleets. Now the FOB itself, see, unlike the defense and response fleets, which seem to already target RR-BSing spider tanking battleships, or any spider tanking stuff, a FOB will target everything at random. So if it's within range, it's going to A, spawn a defense fleet, B, neutralize you, web you, sensor damp you. And the ranges for the sensor damp and the web, I believe, is about 175-ish. $175-ish, but the most annoying thing, of course, is the cap draining. And the FOBs neutralizers can reach out to 262 kilometers. And that's a nasty number. 186 for the damp, and I'm assuming the same for the web. But yeah, the neutralizers just, yeah, they'll ruin your day if you're not prepared for it. After 10 minutes exactly, the FOB's capacitor will drain completely, and all it can do is sensor damp you. Because it wants to use something, it's going to use a sensor dampener and keep the capacitor at 0, pretty much. It will not repair. It's just like an upwell. It'll just wait for its countdown, which is half an hour, I believe, and then it just resets to full. So, the full hull, should I say. And the interesting thing, the low-sec Satoyo Guristas, it's got a much greater, massive repair. It'll keep repairing. You'd need a ton of DPS on field, like much more than I can ever field, unless I go capitals, to keep the repair cycle paused. So that's, I thought I could do it, but I discovered I couldn't. I'm like, screw that. So yeah, don't even bother with the low-sec Satoyos. Let the big boys take care of them. Yeah, that's the other thing you need to know about the FOB itself is the grid. If you're 1,500 kilometers, at least more than 1,500 kilometers away, these will never target you. There will be no frigates to chase you, nothing. They'll just ignore you, literally. So you can warp now I'll get to that in a bit, but as long as it's alive, you're safe anywhere on grid past that 1,500 kilometers. The spawn range for the defense fleet is 365, I think? 375 kilometers, and the FOB will trigger a defense fleet response to whatever it's warping in, or getting up below that number. Now it will spawn an initial defense fleet of quite substantial number. You'd be surprised. You go in with something small, it'll sometimes spawn quite a bit. If it's cruisers, usually 6 to 11 ships. It's RNG basically. Basically every fob is different. Subseep, I think, this is a guess, it's solid enough for me to depend on. You warp in 1, it'll spawn a defense fleet. You warp in 2, it won't. You warp in a third, it'll spawn a reinforcement wave based on what you just warped in. Now, I'm not sure if it's every odd number that'll do it, or if there's a weird, I'm just not paying attention or something. But I do know that it's something weird happens when you warp in a second ship. Maybe it's a second of the same class. I don't know. But regardless, it does seem to be a bit weird with the spawnage. But I know that your initial ship going in will spawn more than the typical. That way you'll get, reinforcements. So if you think, oh my god, I'm going to get tons, no, you won't. Let's see, we've covered the FOB, we've covered the defense fleet, we've covered the response fleet, we've covered the anchor, the damage resist is low on explosive and then kinetic. It's pretty much the reverse of everything else. So all the other ships will have, basically, battleships are vulnerable to thermal, but omens and augers and I believe Ashimus, nope, Ashimus are, okay, so omens and augers are vulnerable to EM. Battleships and Ashimus are vulnerable to thermal. Arbitrators, okay, thermal. But the main worry you have to deal with are the augers when there's more than one. The repping ability of one auger is, well, it's more than you'd expect. And yeah, unless you're prepared to fire trig weapons at omens and gank them that way, you'll have problems using drones against trying to defeat one augers. Of course, you'll like it if the auger gets within range, so you can send drones after it and kill it. But when there's 2 or more, if there's 3 augers on field, yeah, it's really difficult to kill anything. Which means, yeah, if there's cruisers and there's augers with those cruisers, they'll keep the Cruors, the frigates alive as well. So it's really hard to get away. That's why I have MJD. That's your lifeline, especially if, say, somebody else warps in and spawns a whole bunch. What are you going to do, right? So, I think I've covered everything. The payout seems to be a bell curve. It's about 23 million if you have one solo player. Typically, you'll get more loot value than you will its reward payout for the solo player. But if you have, say, alts that you can have off-grid, on-grid, but at safety, who are in, I don't know, mining barges, you'll get the payout for a group. And the optimal is about 10 to 12, I think. The sweet spot is 30 million. If you start to get more, you'll get less payout. So if you've got 22 people on grid, you'll get 22 million each. So it's a significant hit, but it's not a zero-sum game. You cannot have a Corvette on grid and get a reward. You cannot have a shuttle on grid and get a reward. You cannot have a pod on grid and get reward. You can't be a cloaked ship. Of course, you'll all need to be in fleet, but you can't have a cloaked ship on grid and get the reward. There you go. Did I miss anything else? Yeah, the main damage coming in is EM and then thermal. I have my resist to maximize, just ridiculously maximized. So I've got 95 and 91. And that means 5% of the damage for EM is getting through. So that's huge. I can withstand quite a bit, and the reason I go in Leshaks is because they have a buffer, and of course another plate, one plate really adds to that buffer. So it gives me breathing space because the omens, which are the major danger, they tend to all focus fire, and they will eventually shift target. But knock on wood, that means even if you don't, they're breaking your tank, after a while they'll switch targets to another one, and you'll repair that. So there you go. As for the Garistas FOBs, I've never tackled one. I'm like, I go spider tanking. I'm pretty sure that's not going to work that great. Huh. Been a while since they shot this one. So yeah. Anything else? Yeah, if you've got 3 and you don't kill the Cruors and you spawn a few more Cruors, then anything in supporting roles will start being pointed. And the Cruors actually do a lot of damage. Just one of them will actually cut through. Now, it's important to have plates because you need to land reps on anything being shot at. But if you've got 3 on field and you're remote repping and you've got 3 Cruors, if anything else warps in, it's liable to be pointed. And if something gets pointed by a frigate, the omens sometimes, the DPS Blood Raiders will sometimes rarely target you. And that's a problem. I haven't figured out the mechanic behind it, but we jokingly think that it's if you fly a bling ship that's not fit for tanking, they'll prime you. So yeah, and as long as you have remote repping going on, the rats will typically shoot at you and not say drones. But yeah, if you try to be smart like I did and MJD out of range of the FOB itself, but within range for your drones to keep firing on said FOB, if you're too far away and the hauler shows up and spawns its stuff, their closest target is the drones and they'll go for it. They will shoot your drones to death. So yeah, so I stopped doing that and started getting smart. Just screw the MJD to get out of range of the neuting and just go batteries. And that's got, if you didn't know, Capacitor Warfare Resistance bonus. So when it neuts me, I think I get half neuting damage. And I've got, remote transfers. I've got talisman implants that will lower the duration cycle time of the energy transfer, and thus, yeah, it's pretty cool. Duration bonus. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. I get a lot of cap, and the last danger you need to realize is that every FOB is different. If that hauler shows up and it spawns a rare battleship spawn, and you get Boghorns in that mix, they will be close air support Boghorns, and they're scary. They do a lot of neuting damage, and if you've got Ashimus on field and they're all targeting the same person, you're in deep doo-doo, and you need to stop shooting the FOB and start ganking those close range Boghorns off field, just gank them as soon as possible. So it makes a boring FOB bash exciting. And you never know when it's going to happen. Because you're not paying attention, you go get a drink and that hauler spawns. Yeah. And I think I've lost a... Sorry, it's been a while since I looked at losses. Character interaction, combat log, show losses, Armageddon, capsule, wait. There. I believe that was when I got bushwhacked. I think. Yeah, anyways. Yeah, so expensive loss. But yeah, can get scary. Better kill this now. Alright, let's go kill it. So, the interesting thing about the response fleet, well, it gets weird if there's more than one fob in the system. Things get weird when there's more than one fob in the system. But typically, when you kill the fob, the response fleet will despawn. They won't warp off. They won't anything. It'll just poof. They'll go. And also, speaking of the response fleet, if you gank all the response fleet units, the haulers will despawn within 15 seconds. So if you're trying to gank the haulers at their safe spot, make sure you don't kill all the... Okay. Oh, I'm probably shooting my own person, aren't I? Of course I am. Yeah, I've got friendly fire enabled, and yeah, not paying attention. Yeah, sometimes I won't have hardeners on. That's usually how you die. I could have been, the losses I showed you could have been me forgetting to turn my hardeners on because, yeah, scary amount. Scary amount of damage when you don't have your hardeners on. Yeah, it'll despawn the haulers. So do be careful. You're trying to get a rare orca skin from the hauler itself. It happens. It'll be a Blood Raiders loot box. The miners and stuff, they'll sometimes rare, have meta-named mining modules on them. That's about it. And yeah, voila. It's not bad drop. I'm expecting it's because of the Crimson Harvest. Reload the ammo. And just don't bother going after the battleships if you're really into... They don't have any bounty. I know it's stupid, but whatever, right? Besides, if you try to go get them, better point them because they'll just starburst away from you. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I think I'll go home now. Go out scouting for more. Just trying to think if there's anything else I'm missing. Yeah, the augers have, I've estimated 90 sensor strength. So maybe 25% chance of jamming. So it's a bit annoying, especially when you've got 3 of them on field. But yeah, it's always RNG. Like sometimes the best spawns are ones where all cruisers and no frigates, and then you're like, well, I can just kill this fob and warp off, loot it, and go. The salvage, the wrecks, won't leave a damn thing except the fob. And the salvage value is, if you have a lot of Cruors and cruisers on field and you gank them all and you loot, tops $1 million ISK for that total, right? And if you're in the sweet spot, you get 30 million each pilot on grid. You're much better off just warping away and going to the next fob, honestly.
Warp drive active.
That's not a bad drop. I'm aligning, right? No. Yeah, I am.
Autopilot engaged. Autopilot engaged. Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active. Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active.
I'll typically warp off the ones getting shot at first, and then
warp drive
following
active.
behind.
Warp drive active.
Oh. I need to buy more ammo. Lol.
Approaching Stargate.
Typically at the end of it, if I want to take care of the OMS, I'll switch to Baryon. The range on the Baryon is
Stargate.
40 kilometers. You'll want to kill the arbitrators first. They tend to get closer as the fob gets closer to being dying. But yeah, 35 kilometers is typical range for the omens.
Jumping.
So easy enough.
Autopilot jumping. Warp drive active to Stargate. Warp drive active. Warping to Stargate.
And I don't really have to replenish my ammo stocks that much. I usually bring along 5,000 ammo in each Leshak. That'll go for quite a while. You know, I don't want to carry too much. It's fairly bling. What is it? It's $1 billion-esque, but most of that is in the hull. I try not to bling out my ships that much. But in this case, it's definitely worth it, especially if you're plated, right? I mean, how often... I'm not near GDAS, so I don't have to worry about it. And typically, the gankers are after the incursion pilots, and yeah, that's where the ISK is for them. So, and they never know where the next fob is, whereas they know where the choke points for the next incursion is. So there's that. And if I'm playing my cards right, it'll take me maximum 15 minutes to kill a fob. So I'm in and out in 15 minutes. It takes me about an hour to scout my entire region, the entire area around me within 12 jumps, using 8 characters, moving fast in hyperspatial equipped ships, frigates, moving really quick. Yeah, it takes me about an hour. And then I've got typically about 10 fobs on an average on an off day. I don't try to do it on the weekend. At prime time. Prime time is 1800. Just a waste of my time. And I have enough. I have enough to, if somebody's quote-unquote stealing my fob in the area, I can just, okay, they've probably taken care of bunch of FOBs nearby, I'll go to a farther one. So I've always got a list of FOBs I can go to, so it's not a complete loss. But typically I cross my fingers, and most times when I'm doing it smart and going on the off times, non-peak hours, and not on the weekends, I can usually get 10 FOBs a day if I push hard, and that usually takes 5 hours. But that's a lot. With 8 characters, yeah, you do the math. 8 characters times 30 million-ish times 10. That's how much I get purely in ISK straight to my wallet. The loot is very good too when I get around to selling it. I haul it all to Amar, reprocess it, and sell the minerals. Now, there's one last thing. The blueprint copy that you get, the Blood Raiders Neutralizer stand-up module. So I've built about a dozen. I've got lots of them, and I've got 10 blueprints and 8 boxes, and yeah, I even hold the boxes. Now the boxes will take you a freighter to access because they're a freighter sized box, but when you open it up, it's just a blueprint, which is it's hilarious what they were trying. You know what their intent was, to prevent people from stealing it, like, you know, stealing the loot. But it's pretty funny. Anyways, so yeah, if you're interested in the BPC, it'll means you'll need to fly a hauler there. I mean a freighter there in order to open it up. But you can open it up in space and yay, whatever. Yeah, the stand-up signal amplifiers, they're not as lucrative as anything else. So if I'm going to leave anything behind, I'll leave those and pick them up later. The FOBs themselves, I think, will respawn instantly. It might take 15 minutes for them to respawn, but I'm pretty sure they don't act like ice fields, or anything else for that matter. It's a zero-sum game. If you're ganking them in an area, typically they'll spawn anywhere where they could, and they might even have a pool where if you gank Agristas, it could spawn a Blood Raiders elsewhere, right? So if you're ganking an area and nobody else is ganking anywhere else, that means you've just potentially moved all the respawns out of your theater of ops. And yeah, typically I reprocess because the price of the neutralizers aren't lucrative enough to actually sell straight off. Oh, look at my default. That's hilarious. Oh no. What the hell? Really? Is that a recent thing? Wow, it is. Since when? When the hell was that?
Autopilot jumping.
August, September.
Autopilot jumping.
I hate reading it that way. I always want to go like this. So just recently.
Warping to Stargate. Warp
So
drive active.
2 months ago.
Warping to Stargate.
Huh.
Warp drive active.
Interesting. Very interesting. Anyways, maybe the last, maybe you won't, but
Approaching Stargate.
interesting little last bit of data I just had no idea was going to pop up in my Discord.
Approaching Stargate. Active.
Alright. Anyways, I think that's stupidly exhaustive. Did I miss anything from my old data that I've taken for granted for so long? Oh yeah, of course. Silly me.
Warping to station. Warp drive to station. Warp drive active.
Your pod is not going to spawn any defense fleet or any response fleet, but it will be targeted if there are combat ships on the field. The FOB will target you, but it won't spawn anything in response to your presence. So you can actually go in, takes 10 minutes, and you can drain it from initial, it'll exactly 10 minutes from the first time it starts aggroing on you with weapons till it drains completely a FOB, and you can use that to drain the FOB so you can fly in ships and not worry about the neutralizers, which is totally cheesy.
Docking permission requested.
And I use
Docking
a pod
requested. Docking request
to get
accepted.
the bookmark,
Docking permission requested.
and I usually hit
Docking
the
permission requested. Docking request accepted. Disabled. Waypoint reached. Autopilot disabled. Waypoint reached.
I usually get the bookmark set when I think I'm passing 10k kilometers to the FOB. So once it passed, it goes to 1 million, 50, 500 million, 250 million, 50 million, 50,000, and then 25,000. And as soon as I think it's going to pass the 10,000 kilometer till I hit the FOB, I then press enter. What I'll do is I'll go Control B and then have this flashing cursor thing and hover my one finger over the enter key and one finger over my left mouse button, and then as soon as I think I'm passing 10k, I press both. Just, and that helps me get typically it'll get 5,000 to 2,000 kilometers from the FOB, depends on lag, and then I'll warp back to it to make sure, and then I'll warp that ship off, get the ship it was in before, hop board it, and then come back to that bookmark, and then use my FC to warp everybody else to that pilot. That's how I avoid having to deal with grid foo, because sometimes you'll warp to the FOB and it won't be on grid, and you've just smacked face first into grid foo. So that's annoying to deal with. So if you do it the way I just said, you'll avoid grid foo issues entirely.
Warp drive active. Warp drive active. Warp drive active.
lost danger. If you gank the fob and you warp your combat ships that were engaged to your safe spot, the rats will starburst out to you. So be careful once you destroy that fob. The irritation of multiple fobs in the system is that what you have is an issue where multiple bestowers might be warping in on the fob you're attacking, and also that if you've got multiple fobs, if you gank the fob, the response fleet that are there might not despawn, and things get weird when you warp to the next fob. Yeah, because sometimes your safe spot isn't safe. Sometimes the defense fleet will warp into the fob to dock up and possibly engage. It can get really weird, so be prepared for having an interesting time at a fob when there are other fobs in system, or were in system. So yeah. Mostly you hope it's boring so you can move on to the next one, but sometimes it gets a little bit exciting. So there you go. Yeah, and pro tip, don't fly in nesters. I've seen people do it, but they come in with a ridiculous amount of nesters and Leshaks, and just, I wonder what they're thinking, but I think they're actually hacking the game. But hey,